four pages of projects that we have listed, and then what's behind that is the detail. In other words, each project with a description of the project, where it fits within the budget for each year's spending, and so that will provide you the detail to the list that we provided. The main purpose today is to give us as staff an opportunity to present these projects to you, give you detail on a few of them, and then we will look through the list and have a discussion. One of the things that we learned from last year's CIP was that it seemed like there needed to be an opportunity for us to all be in the same room and talk about what projects we wanted to do, what timeline we wanted each of them to occur in, on the particular year that we would do the work. And so from that, we're looking at this being definitely a discussion, and that way we come out of here hopefully with a bit of a consensus. This doesn't have to be the final version. It's not like we have to leave this room with this is the budget, but we'd like it to be as close as possible. If there are questions, obviously the staff will capture those questions, and then we'll have further discussions in March at actual city council meetings where we'll answer those questions and talk about any things that you might want to consider amending the budget with. So what we're going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Nick and let him kind of go through a little bit of our actual process. Looking forward to opportunity to work with you on this. Nick?
So good morning. The outline for today's discussion is pretty informal. We will have a presentation by our Public Works Director, Utilities Director, and also our IT Director, but it will follow the format of the CIP summary sheet that you see starting on page 3 or page 1 in your book. It will generally follow that order. In between each section, after we've presented on those projects, we'll put the summary sheet up on the screen so everyone in the audience can see what we're looking at, and then we'll have any questions and answers at that time on projects that were either discussed in the presentation or that you saw and would like to talk about that maybe not were covered in the presentation. So Jason Peak will be our first presenter, and he'll start to walk through the general obligation bonds. And I'll also, while he's walking up, I'll point out Dan Hanover, who's a management analyst who's been helping out in budget. We're a couple short right now in our office, and he has willfully given his time and done a fantastic job helping put all this together on an early timeline this year. So many thanks to Dan for his help.
All right, good morning. I get to kick off the presentations, and we're going to start hitting the highlights of some of the general obligation bond projects that Public Works does. So I'm not going to go through each one in detail, but hit some of the key ones we have. If we go to the next slide, just continuing our conversation from Tuesday night about facilities, this is a new program that we've put into the budget this year. We're requesting for the facilities maintenance and repair program. And we're very excited about this new program because it reflects our continued progress in implementing what I call asset management practices within the city related to our infrastructure. What you can see on the slide is that the city in total has 237 facility assets. These are buildings like the Holiday building we're in currently, down to equipment storage facilities, our pump stations within utilities that sometimes are located in neighborhoods or other areas, but basically things that have a building envelope, roof, and structure. We have about 237 within the city with a reconstruction value of about $530 million. And you can see it's a little over 3.3 million square feet. You take all those buildings. And then if you also look at what we call our non-enterprise, so these would be structures paid for out of the general fund, so not our utilities or our parking. We have about $126 million reconstruction value, 73 structures, and almost 800,000 square feet of building space. And so as we've been working on facilities throughout the past 3 years since I've been here, we've been increasing our preventive maintenance efforts, which kind of comes out of our operating budget. That's the simple things like changing filters, light bulbs, doing our annual testing, inspection of elevators and things like that. You've seen some major capital projects like the City Hall renovation, proposals for new fire stations and things like that. So that's kind of our building replacement or addition. And then this program kind of fits in that middle piece for what we would call major capital repairs, replacements, or renovations. And it's a combination of things like roof replacements. We had a major mechanical system replacement within a building, like cooling towers, things like that. And it covers a lot of different things. We've combined basically the what was in previous year budgets, the annual fire station renovation would be combined in this, as well as a lot of the individual projects that were proposed in the zoo. And so kind of putting those into one program helps us kind of, as we plan and develop those and get those budget estimates to work through and deliver those. The other thing I want to point out is what budget priority goal does this meet? You know, one of the things you guys do is adopt budget goals and priorities every year. And so this is reflecting, you know, what it'd say, investing in the infrastructure that the city has by planning for timely repair of that $530 million in asset value. We go to the next slide. So just kind of walk through a little bit of detail and show you some of the variety of facilities. The top left corner is an equipment storage building out at 2nd and Golden. Moving to the right, this is our traffic maintenance shop up in North Topeka. Bottom left corner, of course, one of our many fire stations, and bottom right corner, the zoo facility, concessions facility. So that's just a little bit of flavor. Next slide, Dan. And then a couple more. Of course, the LEC, which we do have an agreement with sheriffs and county to lease some space there. And then on the right is a pump station. So that's just a little flavor of the different varieties we have. Talking in particular about what this project would include, as we look out over the CIP, so 2020 to 24, this would do a little over 168 separate projects through those facilities. That would include things like the annual station renovations that we're planning with the fire station. And I just want to talk a little bit about that because we hear about, you know, why are we prioritizing certain things over others? So with fire stations, they're a particular animal. We can't close all the fire stations at once and renovate them all in 1 year. Why? Because you've got to keep those operations going. So, you know, as we're working on number 3, basically those folks have moved equipment around and responding, and we're trying to be systematic as we work on fire stations, work through those replacements and renovation, and then also recognizing that there's still that larger conversation about a new station, what level of service that fire is going to have, and so we're planning for those renovations. I just want council to know when they say, what are we doing for the fire department? We've worked with the chief to kind of lay out an annual plan, and that's what this program would help do. This would also do about 36 projects at the zoo, including things like replacement of one of my favorite places at the zoo is the tropical rainforest. We need to replace and upgrade the HVAC system out there. We need to replace the roof for the primate facility out there, and then some public area electrical service upgrades. At the LEC, we're looking at needing to replace the cooling towers out there, you know, similar project to what was done at City Hall. And then within this building, the Holiday Building, we need to do a boiler replacement, as well as the building envelope. We've got some leaks around our window sills in this building and need to look at some systematic repair. And so that's just kind of a highlight of some of the projects that come in there. The last thing I'd say is kind of where did this budget value came from? You know, we've done a lot of work and research at looking from literature from National Academy of Sciences and the Government Building Administration about best practices for building management. And kind of the industry trend is to recommend about 2% of your replacement value for maintenance and repair. This is about a 1.8%, which is a little less than what that recommendation is. but it's significantly more than what we've been spending over the past 3 years. We've averaged about 1.3 million annually over the past 3 years for our building maintenance and repairs. And so that's kind of a highlight of this. This would add an additional million a year to that funding level, and I think really put us on a good path to get our facilities in good shape. So next on the list is another exciting project, our neighborhood, yes? Okay.
Can we do questions on those when the category's done, or what?
Well, when we get to GO, if you would, he'll go through the GO, and then if we could come back at that point, that would be better. Rather than each item, we think that would be better.
Yeah, I mean, I can defer to whatever process you want to do.
Depends on how often. I mean,
We're not going to cover, I guess, as I go through the presentation, I'm not going to cover every line item, so.
Understood.
we can wait. That would be better, I think. Let's get a little bit further.
All right. So we're going to talk about Neighborhood SORT program. Many of you are intimately familiar with this. It's our annual program to upgrade infrastructure and housing elements in neighborhoods that go through a competitive process, basically to apply for these SORT fundings. Why do we do this? This program supports activities to improve neighborhood health. You know, we have the neighborhood health score through planning and development services. And then we use this process through 3 different departments actually to deliver this program. First with our Department of Neighborhood Relations that works with the Community Advisory Council and the NIAs to solicit applications. These applications are reviewed by that Community Advisory Council, and then they actually select the neighborhood that gets chosen. And once that happens, they get handed off to the planning department. And the planning department then works with them to either update or develop a neighborhood plan. And within that neighborhood plan, there's a lot of things about what the neighborhood could be doing. And one of those things is infrastructure upgrades that we can do within a target area. And that's what the SORT funding goes towards. For the housing piece, then it goes back to neighborhood relations to help with housing. And this GO bond portion reflects the infrastructure piece at a cost of about $1.7 million per year. And it funds things like sidewalks, street upgrades, and we've also done some utility work. We had the recent change last year about matching requirements for park funds and things that are done within the parks. We'll go to the next slide. And one of the things I'm really excited about is the 3 departments have worked really well to, what I'd say, streamline this process. When I got here in 2016, we had some SORT projects from 2013 and 2014 that had not gone out for construction yet. And so, you know, we worked to get those completed. But we really want to keep this within a 3-year planning process, i.e. the neighborhood gets selected in 1 year. The next year they go through the planning effort. And then in that 3rd year, we're trying to do design and construction. And so you may recall we had basically Quinton Heights Steel was a neighborhood that you recently approved those plans. We had a neighborhood meeting, and that's what this picture is showing, kind of their target area improvements, which is street reconstruction improvement, taking some of the streets over there still have open swales, so this is going to a closed curb and gutter system. Adding sidewalks. This neighborhood also, prior to the change in park policy, wanted to have a connection across the Shunga to the skate park, and so it includes a bridge element. And we are moving forward with bidding. This project will be under construction this summer. So we've worked to really streamline that and get them on track. The other piece we've done is we've changed the process. It used to be you'd select 2 neighborhoods in 1 year and the funding was split over 2 years. We're doing 1 neighborhood a year now. And why is that? It's still the same amount of funding per neighborhood, but to get in line with our CIP, because if we know prior to starting this process what that neighborhood's going to be out in that 3rd year, we can better align projects. And I'll give you an example. The one selected this year is Central Park that we're going to be doing the planning process with. Well, we just recently completed upgrading all the streets in Central Park. So just imagine, you know, if we'd known Central Park was selected 3 years ago and kind of aligned that with the SORT funding, you can have a significant impact in the neighborhood. So we're real excited about that. Next slide. So we've talked a lot about pavement management, so I won't reiterate a lot of that, but I want to highlight GeoBond funds a lot of our, not only our pavement management plan, helping us reach our PCI goal, but also works with our long-range transportation plan to upgrade or improve our facilities for future traffic or mobility demands. A lot of the projects you see within the GEO are arterials or significant traffic-way routes. And they meet the, basically our project goal or the budget goal of investing in infrastructure and public safety. And then I'd also argue they meet the goal of quality of life, because a lot of times what we're doing with these projects is adding some of those multi-use paths, landscaping or aesthetic treatments that the community is looking for. The estimated cost of this project is a little over $5.6 million. And one of the things we are doing to kind of work with all the demands on the GeoBond, and Nick talked about the GeoBond cap policy, part of the funding for this project will also come out of the Fix Our Streets or citywide half-cent sales tax. And basically, we're working through that 3-year process where we do design in 1 year. So we've already been working on design, right-of-way and utilities in 2019, and then looking for construction in 2021. And we'll go to a picture. So here's the existing corridor. What the plan for this corridor will be is similar to what you saw east of Fairlawn. So that section from Fairlawn to Gage, where we went to a 3-lane section that provides for safer turning movements at our intersections and entries to the neighborhood, as well as kind of continuing that multi-use path on the north side. So being able to connect these neighborhoods to Gage Park. And then ultimately down to Wanamaker, and you think about some of the multi-use paths that will tie around back to Cedars Crest and some of those areas. So we're really creating a nice network for multiple transportation uses. All right, next is our traffic signal replacement program. Many of you know we have over 186 traffic signals throughout the city. These have about an asset value of $53 million if you total up what the value of those assets are. And so why do we do this project? Signals are a critical part of our infrastructure. They regulate traffic and pedestrian movement. This is where we have, about 50% of our accidents occur at signalized intersections within the city of Topeka. So they're an important public safety function in making sure that these work well. And then I'd also say, thinking towards the future, these signals will become the communication points with vehicles and pedestrians. I mean, if you are watching kind of the autonomous vehicles or just connected vehicles, part of that connectivity is being able to communicate with our signals. Now, we've set up a lot of the software system and some of the electronic components in our signals to be ready for that. But a lot of the hardware and other pieces are things that we need to work on getting in good shape. This project meets the goal of investing in infrastructure and the goals in the community for public safety. The cost, it's about $885,000 a year, and that allows us to do about 3 signals a year. And I want to kind of walk you through what's involved with the signal replacement. So here's 4 photos from a couple of different signal locations, and things I want to point out is, we have different vintages of traffic signals and mast arms throughout the community. So that top left, you're looking at a signal and a welded kind of mast arm. These things don't last forever, especially out here in the Midwest with the wind load. You can think about, if you've seen some of our mast arms kind of bounce in the wind, that repeated stress strain can cause those areas to fail over time. Bottom left, you can see damage just from a vehicle crash or something like that hit the bottom of the signal pole. And then what the public doesn't see is the top right, you're looking at basically one of the plates removed off the pole. That bridge is making sure all the electrical connections that go to the signals or the pedestrian heads or the PED buttons back to the computer that run the signal. That's how we transfer that. And so you can see these wiring components are exposed to the elements, freeze, thaw, dust, heat, rain. I mean, they're in a sealed corridor, but they just don't last forever. And then lastly, within signals is the underground conduit that connects those different, all four legs of an intersection connect back to what we call a central controller. And so those conduits get damaged over time. We have splices. And when this wiring gets shorts in it from just age or damage, that's what can cause signals to malfunction. So, timing not being bad, not picking up vehicles, some of the things you probably hear from the citizens, it gets back to this infrastructure. So it's real key that we work on upgrading these. We do annually inspect every signalized intersection within the city. We go up in the bucket truck, we're looking at the welds and the condition of the structure. We look at the electrical, we clean the buses, get the dust off, our cabinets have filters. But then we also have two other things I'd say drive signal replacement. One is compliance. We have a lot of signalized intersections, and Dan, if you'll go to the next one, we'll talk about ADA compliance and just changing traffic pattern needs. So this is a before and after picture at 29th and Burlingame. Up on the left's the original signal, and the one thing I want you to notice is the pedestrian push buttons for this signal are located on the actual silver pole. If you look on the bottom right, you'll see there's like two little poles placed closer to the crosswalks. And that's part of the ADA compliance, is actually putting that push button in the path where a disabled person would have better access to it, as opposed to making them go to the signal, then come back to the path of access. We also upgrade our pedestrian heads with a stop and sometimes the countdown timers to better communicate that. Another compliance feature on our signals is the signage, and one thing you'll notice on this is the way the lettering and the size of the letters on Southeast 29th Street. It's actually gone a little bit larger, and I appreciate that as a person with aging eyes because it makes it easier to read, but that's the current guidance within MUTCD about sign height. So a lot of different components. The last piece I'll talk about is just the LED luminaires. So that's the black arm kind of stretching out. We also upgrade those. So there's a lot of pieces to a signal replacement. For 2020 through 2022, we're looking at 17th and Fairlawn, 10th and McVicker, Southwest 15 and Lane, I-70 at Southeast Adams, and Southeast 37th at Adams is kind of what we anticipate with this program. And
The next project is mine, the Weir retrofit chute. We've been discussing the Weir addition, the upstream Weir, for a while. As we looked at the different fundings and trying to figure out exactly the additional costs, decided that this was a project that we needed to put into the GEO funding for this year. You look, the original project was $500,000 funded from state, federal funding, dealt with the fish ladder, 1.45 in general funding, and $300,000 from utilities funding. As we've looked at a redesign, we're looking at a $4.6 million total project, which will require us to have an additional $2.35 million from GEO funding in order to move this project forward. One of the things we talked about was that as this is a project that will affect everyone within the community, that we needed to look at this being funded with GEO bonds rather than in with water. And go to the next slide. As you see, the intakes on the bottom, the west and east intake for the water coming from the river into the plant. Currently, this addition to the weir is not necessary for us to be able to continue to have our water flow. There are some purposes that are basically handled by the existing dam weir that is there. As you look at the project, it has a number of components. As they looked at the redesign, we have created a fish ladder and a boat chute bypass on the north side, north bank, which will allow those that are traversing the river to be able to go through that and around the dam so that they can do so in a safer manner. The existing weir that's there will have rock added to the east side in order to be able to ensure that there's a safer environment should someone go over that, which would prevent the turbulent effect that occurs with the existing dam. So that'll make it much safer. So all this work is this is the best design, best price that we feel that we can do in order to be able to create the desired end result of being able to bypass the stem without having to do a portage. And so for us, we feel like this is something that should be considered this year in the funding. We've been talking about this project for a long time, and I think that in my mind it's something that we need to move forward with at this time. It's really the next thing. We can't have further discussions about the grand scheme of being able to do a downstream weir and create a area that is for recreation until we get the upstream weir done. And there are lots of benefits both in the recreation for this area if we can go ahead and get this done. So that's why it's in there for this year. The last item that I'll cover, if you see the last item in the GO bonding, is one we've labeled City Council Community Support Projects. And it's not for the CIB. In other words, it's not in the next 3 years, but it is something that as staff we looked at as a possibility. From time to time, as you go through the CIP process, there's always something that we seem to miss that you've heard about within the community that you're interested in funding. So what we would do is put $1 million there, and that's just to pick a number, and then we could talk and have a discussion about what project might make sense for the community to consider as you guys in looking at a specific project that you could agree on to fund, or multiple projects. It's a great deal of money. You know, we talk about different things like sidewalks, or this particular part needs a trail, or, you know, those types of things. And it gives you the opportunity to really target something that you feel as a group would be needed within the community. So it's really a discussion starter. It's not in this year's CIB, so it wouldn't mean that any authorization would occur, but it gets the process started for us to determine if that's something you would like to see. So with that, if Dan would go to the spreadsheet, and we'll take questions. Ladies.
Okay. My question was about the facilities maintenance plan this shift, and it's two parts, I guess, but could you discuss what the interface is between this new plan and the maintenance that we have been doing in the past in the operating budget? Is there a change out of operating budget into bonding, and where's the line between what would be considered maintenance that would be operating and something that would be in this bucket?
Yes, ma'am. So this is really trying to target those planned and known repair expenses that meet our capital asset definition. So if we do, for example, a roof replacement at the LEC, it's a little over $1 million there. That would be something to fit in this budget. We also have a complementary project within the cash funding of $300,000 per year that would be for those unplanned emergency type repairs. We have a air conditioning unit that goes out at a fire station or something like that. That would be the basically maintenance and repair budget for that. But this is really looking at those things that we're systematically building a plan for capital replacement. The other pieces that come out of the operating budget, like I said, are the preventative maintenance activities, so changing filters on our systems, doing the annual testing and inspection of our fire suppression systems, those pieces, that would be maintenance and repair. And then, of course, the operating funds would fund the project management and support that's done to deliver these major projects. This could also pay, like if we needed to hire a designer, for example, for like fire station renovations, it would pay for kind of that cycle of design and planning in 1 year and then go into building construction the next year.
I realize it's a little early because we're doing the CIP first, but what are you anticipating in terms of the budget in the operating budget for the repairs, preventive maintenance, and so on from here on out?
So right now we will probably be sticking with the operating budget level that we've had in the past. We have more need than what we've been funding out of operating or CIP.
I understand that. I guess my point with that was sometimes things just age and need to be worked on, but I wasn't sure whether we had failed to do preventive maintenance and repair at the level that we should have.
So,
And
yeah.
so just balancing that.
Sure.
Like we are with
Well, one of
streets.
the things I'd say to maybe to help give you some understanding of how we're doing it is we talk about asset management. We're going to talk about it more as we get into cash projects, but our facility staff has been compiling an inventory of all of our building systems. And we've not had that in one place. We've had it in bits and pieces. We've had detailed inventory for some buildings and others. And basically what they're working to do is kind of, put together all our mechanical systems. And what is the PM schedule for that? And so doing those work orders, and that's what's ultimately what will drive that operating budget. So we're about 90% done with that inventory process. But that's what the operating budget's based on. It's not to say we won't still have those surprises that come up in systems, but that's why the cash funding of the $300,000, we're not incurring interest costs on that. I mean, it'd be something that we feel is at a level for those emergency repairs going forward.
And you think it's adequate for preventive at this point?
I think it's adequate at this point. Like I said, we're continuing to refine that and may come back as we have more detail available, but it's where we are today.
I would just add that, this is really just continuing what we've been doing, but adding to it, essentially. So the same basic practice, but for instance, in like the fire station renovation, that was a cash project before. And so we were having to wait 2-3 years before we could get to one station. By putting it on the GO bond side, that allows us to do the design, construction within a shorter time period, and thus, have probably additional cost savings to that project by being able to condense the timeline on it.
Go ahead, Councilman Cook.
Who
Yes.
goes?
Okay. This is probably along the same line, only I have to ask it differently so I can understand it. So we have a fire station you're renovating. You have some put back in maintenance. Our fire stations are in such disrepair. So if you have a fire station over here whose roof is falling in, how are you going to, and somebody's boiler stock quits and somebody's, how are you going to manage all that with one renovation of one fire station? It's like our roads. We let them go so long that now they're so bad that we're going to have to put more money into this. So how are we going to do that?
Yeah, so that's part of our asset management process. First piece is inventory, knowing what we have.
Right.
Second piece is condition. And third piece is kind of like life cycle or return on investment. And that's what we're putting together for all those over 200 facilities so that we can systematically plan and communicate to you the level of funding needed to do that. This has been what I'd say an iterative process. When I first got here, we worked really hard on streets and have put a lot of attention to streets. And I feel like, what you'll see, we've got that program running. We're applying that same principle here to get that inventory, that condition. On the building side, what is the life cycle that we expect out of, whether it's a furnace, a boiler, an HVAC system, electrical panel, fire, all those, and then put that into a matrix we can communicate to you. We don't have all that done, so what we're doing at this point is we're estimating, we know we need additional funding. So like I said, we've gone about $1 million over what we have been spending over the past 3 years. It's less than that 2% of the building value that's recommended and allows us to systematically plan. Like I said, we have met with the chief to talk about that planning cycle for different fire station facilities and lay out a schedule for that. As Nick indicated, we can accelerate that a little bit since we're now working within the GO bond realm as opposed to waiting to see our cash flow. The second piece I'd say is we've spent about $1.2 million on our fire stations over the past 3 years. The large chunk being station number 3, but we are working towards roof repairs. We've been doing a lot of furnace replacements and things like that within the fire systems over the past 3 years. And so it's getting us to that more proactive model. I don't have it complete and ready to show you, but what I can tell you is we're on the path towards
And I understand that, but what is the timeline? Are you talking 5 years, 10 years, 1 year?
So the goal with the fire station project is basically we would be doing one every 2 years.
Right. But then what are you doing with the other high maintenance costs on other stations at the same time?
So we've got two things we're working within that. So we have this fund if there are mechanical systems or window replacements or the plow mat vent for the trucks, things like that that need to be upgraded. We can work to do those separate from.
Immediately, like in an immediate response, or years?
If you approve this CIP and CIB, you give us authorization to spend that funding, and then it's on us as the managers to say, yes, we were planning to do that. We can defer that because now we have this immediate need here and need to take care of that.
Okay.
So there's some flexibility within this. That's why you're not seeing all those individual
Right.
facilities projects, because it allows us to, I guess, be a little more flexible when we do have those emergency needs. Our intent, though, is if they are small capital expense needs, to fund that out of cash as opposed to use the GO bond. This is more what we'd like to do, is that systematic planning and replacement piece.
Good. And then on the lights, traffic signals, you said you do about 3 a year, and we have how many? And so how many years does that take to replace
We're on
them
a
all?
60-year replacement cycle for our intersections. Ideally, we'd like to be at a 30-year, which would require about doubling the current level of funding to get there.
So then that means, like, by the time you get finished updating the signals, the signs, the ADA requirements, we're starting over with.
There's a life cycle to any infrastructure, and you know what I think it's a reflection of risk, in the sense of ideally you'd want a 30-year replacement cycle. You know, you can't go to one of these mast arm and pole manufacturers and get them to tell you what the lifespan of that pole is. They don't do that, you know, and so our estimates is probably 30 years is the sweet spot, but there are definitely all over this country, you can go and find signals and mast arms that are probably 60, 70, 80 years old. You can find some traffic signals that have 80-year-old components in them. And so it's just, you can have those, you can keep them working,
Right.
but there's a cost of that maintenance. And so right now, this is the level given all the other priorities, because even within Public Works, we know we're working within the GO bond, and we have to set aside money for sidewalks, our facilities, our streets. And so part of that is also our calculus, but we do want to communicate what the current life cycle replacement is and what the ideal one would be.
So that 800,000 includes replacement and repair?
That is typically what we call a capital, I mean, it's a replacement only. I mean, minor repairs and things like that, we do out of the operating budget for traffic operations. But we will partner these signal replacement projects sometimes with our pavement projects. So if we've got a pavement management project that's redoing the intersection at one of these signals, that's part of our calculus in combining those together.
Okay, thank you.
Jason, I appreciate your thorough explanation. I appreciate you looking at me when you talk about the fire departments. I've seen that, but you're talking to the council. The concerns that I have, I'm just teasing you there, is that with our fire stations, we have done like the streets. We've kind of pushed them back, and now they're in need of repair. So I'm happy to hear about the list. I really am. And I'd like to see the list because, you know, I get calls or I get texts of this is wrong or this is wrong or this is wrong. It's not that they can't continue to function, but it's just things that need to be done. You know, whether it's black water in the stool, you know, from the sewer line or whatever. So those are the concerns that I have. And I understand the whole process of, you know, when we renovate, how the fire department has done a great job of, putting engine companies where they need, they do a great job of that. They always watch the closings of the streets. You can go into the fire stations and they've got it on the board, what's closed or not. So they do a very good job of that. But that is my concern, is that I just want to make sure that not only the fire station, but projects that have been pushed back for another new project or stuff like that. But I'm glad to hear about the list. I really am. Because as a council rep, I mean, when we come to talk about the CIP, our brains are like, oh, what have we heard or what do we know? So that would be really, really good. So we can, throughout the year, just kind of touch base with you. So I look forward to that and getting them what they need, whether it's a light fixture that's messed up or a stool or a water faucet or whatever. So I'm looking forward to that. On the LEC, does that include the parking lot? Because the parking lot is terrible over there. Does the maintenance include that?
We don't have that programmed at this point. The resurfacing, you're talking about the asphalt portions of the lot. We do not have that programmed at this point.
Okay. And how do we, I mean, how does that, whether it's this parking lot or any parking lot that we have? I mean, because for years I talked about on 7th Street, and when people get out, it's just terrible. Whether they're falling or they're in heels. I know you don't wear heels, but I mean, whether
Not
they're
usually.
whether their heels get caught. I mean, it's just the crumbling is just terrible. So I would like to know how does that get addressed? Let's see, 2nd and Golden, the building there. I know we use that for maintenance or storage. What exactly? And we used to have all of our big old. And I think we still might have some of that. And I know Code was using it. What is it being used for now?
Code and facilities has storage. I don't have the details of all the
And you can get back
Yes.
to me. That would be great. And then, let's see. The 36 projects, we have that many projects at the zoo going on? Or we have 36 projects that need repair? Is that what you're
So
saying?
we've got, what we can work to do is get you a list of that description, because that's what I'm hearing you ask for. But this is the list that our facilities division gave to me and saying,
Okay.
this is what we would need to do. So it's not to say all of them are large projects. They may be pieces, but we'll get you a
So
list.
it could just be something real simple as a bridge
It's
or
good.
that's
Well,
a project.
I would say it could be something simple, but it's going to be something that meets our capital asset policy. So we'll get you a list on that.
And then I know there's a huge project that's going on that has us detouring around Engage Park. I don't know what that is. Is that,
That's part of the stormwater improvements for Kay's Garden.
oh, is that?
Yeah,
Okay.
So that's like the upstream detention to make sure that once they build Kay's Garden, it doesn't get flooded out through all
Okay.
the drainage in the park.
Okay. Because I know at one time we talked about expanding the bathhouse there. I call it the bathhouse, but the theater there. And that's, people are thinking, oh, we're building a new theater. I'm like, I have no idea, So, okay. All right. And then one last question with the where, city manager. Have we tapped out on all the money that we can tap out before we bring it? And I just need to ask this for my constituents before they say, I mean, this is a lot of money. I think it's a great project. Don't get me wrong. I remember when we started talking about it. But have we tapped out on all the money that we can tap out? And I know everything is just starting to tighten up, federally and statewide. So that would be my question to you.
Yes, for this particular weir we have. Now, we're going to pursue funding for the downstream weir. That'll, once we are done with this project on the upstream weir, we'll pursue the downstream weir funding. But for this particular project, we have, and also one of the grants that we have, which is part of the 500,000, does have a date that is going to come where if we don't utilize it,
Use
we're
it
going
or
to
lose it.
So
Okay.
we need to act pretty soon if we want to be able to capture that money.
And do you know when that date is?
I wanted to say we needed to obligate it by September. I'm trying to remember. I'm going by memory. I'll have to go back and check the Riverfront
Of this
Authority notes, but I believe it was September. So we needed to have our authorization in this year to be able to show that we're obligating that money, and then there's work that they can start in this
Right.
year with the money that's been previously approved, which will then allow them to obligate that money, and we can continue to utilize that funding that's been approved for.
Okay, thank you. And Jason, one last question on the lights. I know we used to have a list. Are we still going off that previous list
The list,
for the street lights of where they were at and how bad they were?
you're talking about the, like West Star streetlights or our traffic?
No, our
sig-
traffic, I'm sorry, our traffic.
Traffic signals, so yeah, I mean, that's, like I said, there are a number of different factors. We look at age of signal.
So we still kind of use that, but then also go
We
around
use that guide, but
annually?
it's also, looking at traffic capacity changes. Like I said, the other part of what we're trying to do within Public Works, utilities, and just all CIP is when we have locations that overlap and we get better bang for a buck, so that may elevate.
Elevate it up, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Another question about the lists. I'm really pleased as you're beginning to get these inventories and the lists straight, but this would have to do with this geo section, but also other ones like the fix our streets and so on. Alleys, for instance. It used to be that you all had some sort of list of alleys internally, but then when it rolled up, particularly to the CID, the staff would disclose what alleys they had in mind for the coming year. Similarly to these, if you're going to trunk all the facilities together, would there be a way for us to see the list, the master list that you have, if, for instance, we had a constituent question about where X or Y was on the list, and then would you be giving us a short list for what you planned for the CIB years when the budget comes through?
Sure, we can provide that information. The one thing, and we'll talk about as part of asset inventory, just want to talk about when these programs that we're looking at, there's what I would say flexibility as the programs get delivered, and a lot of that gets to asset inventory. So alleys, for example, would be one thing. What is our priority for alleys?
Understood.
Yeah, and it's a rhetorical question because, I mean, alleys don't have the same, applying a PCI goal to alleys is probably maybe not the most appropriate. You may have goals for economic development, so you want to do alleys in the business districts opposed to residential areas, or it may be the reverse of that. And so we kind of have a working list from our technical recommendation that we provide to you, but I think as we get into a lot of these asset categories and we develop these asset management systems, we're going to be coming back to you to talk about level of service or priorities to help us apply that matrix consistently. And then that, will just result in better decision making. And then once we have all that built, then we can layer all these different projects, those level of service. And when the CIP comes to you, you can feel pretty comfortable that those recommendations are based on those level of service goals that we're at. We're not there yet, so come back to you, we can get those working lists, but I just want to understand that when we put these out there, every year as we refine the process, those lists may change.
And I think we understand that, but I appreciate it. I in particular, if people have called in curb and gutter, or they got told their alley was on the list for 20X, and then it's gone, it was just kind of a moving target. And I think people do understand it can change. But as this is shaping up, I really appreciated getting the list, the short list anyway, when we were doing the annual budgeting, and then having some idea that it would be reliable or things had changed, being able to go in and give people an idea where their project or their curb or whatever it was on the list. So thank you for that.
Yes, sir.
Quick question. Going back to the City Hall renovation base phase, I was not obviously here in 2016, but I was reading that SWIRT had done a assessment and so forth. SWIRT's not involved in it now, though, correct?
No, sir. It's KBS and Trainer's the architect.
Can I get a copy of that report? I've
Yes.
never seen
Yes.
it or had it. Thank you.
Yes.
Right, sorry. This is actually, well, I don't know who this would be for because the city manager is the one who spoke on the Weir project, but, I guess kind of shame on me as I went through here. You have to read very closely because there's only one place that shows there's previous funding. When you look, it just looks like it's about the same funding level as before. There's really only one place that says previous funding and total funding. My issue is this bid last year, and if we're redesigning it to save money, which I think is fantastic, but we simply raised the budget amount to over what we could have awarded it for last year. And I can tell you, as a contractor, I looked at the project. We raised several major questions about the project. You can't go in the middle of the Kansas River and dig 15 foot deep and have a dry excavation, or it's going to cost $4.5 million. And my issue is we could have done the project within the original budget if we would design to the constraints of here's how much we can spend instead of, dream whatever you want and hope it comes in the budget. And so I guess my concern is I can see an incremental increase in the original funding for the project, maybe for inflation. But if they would have looked at a redesign of it as far as constructability, I think it could be done in the original budget. So frankly, this is hard for me to support. I see all the things that $2 million worth of water line replacements in these neighborhoods where they're breaking every other block several times would go a long ways. And this is a needed project, but at what cost? So I would, like I said, I don't really know how you adjust something in here or what we could do, but I do think there's significant cost savings that could be done if we evaluate that from how much can we spend instead of what do we need to raise it to.
I think the better to ask Bob Sample to talk on that a little better. He's been involved in the design and those kind of processes and the rack.
No, it's fine. Yeah. Well, we did go back and look at a redesign. So, that's kind of what we've come back with. We can certainly take another look at it. But that's really where we're at with the figures.
And without looking at the plans, the redesign, I wouldn't know, but again,
Right.
it looks like maybe Mr. Gerber is going to elaborate too.
I can elaborate a little bit, Councilman, because I was involved 3 years ago when this started. We brought in a nationally recognized Weir expert to do the design for us, a gentleman out of Colorado, and he submitted plans, and those plans were put out to bid about the middle of last fall, as you know. And the contractor prices came back at about $4.2 million. In the budget, we had a little over $2 million, so we obviously knew that we had to do something. Had some conversations with yourself, and in that regard, then we went back to the designer, talked to other places where weirs like this had been designed, and asked them to take a look at it and see what they could come up with, make sure we were on the right track, make sure we hadn't missed things, make sure, for example, you mentioned excavating in Kansas River and trying to keep a dry bed, make sure the rocks were appropriate, all those sorts of things. And so we literally sent them back to the drawing board. They came back with this new design, which to your point is more expensive than the old design. But I think what it shows us is that if we want this project, this is the path that we need to take. We've done 2 cracks at this by licensed engineers, and they've shown us that this is the design to improve both safety and recreational aspects of the river.
But if I may, and I'm sorry, I would have talked to you about it before this had I realized this was an increase to this before today. But we simply, so with the redesign, it should be cheaper than the original bid you would hope, correct? But we've actually increased it to pass where, if you'd have this, you could award the original design at this level of funding. And I guess that's kind of troubling that I would think, if you redesign it to save money, and now it's just as much as it was before.
Councilman, I guess I would say, I would say we didn't necessarily redesign to save money. That was certainly one of the things we wanted to look at, but we wanted to redesign to make sure that we were on the right path and that this was indeed the project that would meet our needs. Again, both for recreational and for safety aspects of this particular project. And I think, frankly, it somewhat mirrors the discussion we continue to have on all of our facilities, that we do it now or we do it in 6 months or a year or 5 years, and it just gets exponentially more expensive.
But what if you could do what was originally, what you needed within the original budget, I guess is my point. With respect, there's a lot of great engineering firms in Topeka that have a lot more experience here locally and would reach out to local contractors they deal with on a regular basis. I believe the low bidder was not even from here, it was out of Colorado, I think.
I can't answer that, sorry.
TSP, which I believe is out of Colorado, who's worked with his engineer. Again, my issue is, when you go to a meeting and there's contractors saying you can't do what you're wanting to do for this amount of money, given the parameters, and no one changes a damn thing, and then they wonder why is it this price? So, sorry, it's just frustrating when I see. I mean, you guys do. I mean, I see so many areas that you guys, scraping the bottom of the barrel to get funding for, and then other places where we seem to kind of lose our head spending wise. So that's it. I'll shut up for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Doug, since you come forward, nice,
I wasn't quick enough, huh?
yeah, nice jacket there.
Thank you.
Oh, no.
It's my normal attire, so don't take any offense.
That was a joke, Doug.
For the mayor.
Didn't we have the Corps of Engineers come in and speak to us at length about this, about the weir? Or do you know, or were you around at that time?
Councilwoman, I wasn't around at that time. We've had conversations with them, certainly about both the upstream and the downstream weir and how those interact and what levels of funding we can potentially get for both projects. So they've been involved in conversations, but in terms of a direct design of this downstream weir, I would say, or upstream weir, then the answer is no, they haven't been involved in that.
Okay, thank you.
Just a couple questions. I can't speak to the schematics as Mr. Emerson did in regards to the weir, but I do have a couple questions. Is it primarily, are we primarily talking about safety and recreation in regards to boaters, kayakers? Is that primarily what we're talking about in regards to the purpose of this and how it ties into riverfront development? Am I on the same page as that?
Well, if I could, I'm sorry, I don't mean to contradict anyone. I think the genesis of the project was safety, but I think it's morphed into safety/recreational. And we hear the phrase activate the river a lot, and that certainly has a safety component to it, but it's, I would say, primarily recreational.
Thank you. And I don't want to minimize safety in any way, shape, or form, but I think there's a certain amount of an assumption of risk that people take when they decide to go 30 miles an hour down a ski slope or get in a river in a kayak, and I think there's a certain assumption of risk that you take. My concern, quite frankly, is, and I am not at this point in time, I'm not an opponent or a proponent of the riverfront development plan because I don't really know what that is, and I don't think anybody really does. My concern is the number of projects that we do have right now in regards to, for instance, water line replacement, that every time I pick the paper up, or every time I look at my phone, something has broken. And I just think we have some priorities and we're maybe getting a little bit of ahead of the ball. I can't speak, like I said, to the schematics of it, but, even in the best case scenario very rarely even right now have I looked out and seen very many people going down the river in a recreation camp. I think if we could get that to go, great, that's fine. But the other piece of that is even in the best case scenario, kind of like I tell my kids when I evaluated, they wanted to get a ski boat. Well, in Kansas, you get it for about 3 months. So as I come back around to this, I just don't know if this is the right time for this type of expenditure based on the other needs that we have, and then the really lack of a firm plan of what riverfront development is, commitments from private side of if we do go that. That's kind of what my concern is. I don't know if right now is the right time for that.
Thank you so much. Councilwoman Hiller, would you like to go first? Please.
Regarding, I have a general statement and then one specifically about the weir. This might be the right time to just say, I personally am very concerned. Our predecessors put the cap on the geo-bonding limit, and I want to stay with it. There was an intent for those dollars to eventually begin to drop so that we had more money in the operating budget, and we need it. And so I don't want to see us go over our cap. I'm concerned that we've got money backed up as well, that this year is going to be a big year anyway for projects that have been slow moving along. That said, as I said on Tuesday evening, I think, I want to do all these projects. I want to do the buildings, I want to do the weir, I want to make sure we do our traffic signals and so on. So I think we need to challenge ourselves in this process to see if there are other places, not just go, oh, well, bonding's easy because, you know, people will pay for it in the future. Our revenue hadn't gone up markedly anyway. It should as we continue to do our investment and reinvestment. Using the weir as an example, and I am absolutely in favor of the weir, but I do appreciate Councilman Emerson's comments about looking again at the design. I've been inside some of the feedback from the contractors when the first one went around as well. But I also think with every single project, we need to step back and say, what's this for? Who's benefiting? And are there some other sources of funding that we could put together? In the case of the weir, for instance, I respectfully disagree that there are no other sources of money. We're about to get the market study back through Momentum 2022 that's going to talk about economic opportunities both in downtown and in Noto and on the river. Certainly, if we develop the river and make this investment, we should have more people locally as well as visitors using that river. We're also talking about recreational uses. So when we step back on that, we have, you know, we gave away our recreation functions. I don't know that we've invited the county to participate. It's an option. We have economic development money. If we're investing this for economic development purposes, maybe we should look at some of the economic development sources that our taxpayers are paying into. And third, it's a tourism draw, and we have dollars we're collecting for tourism. And so just using the weir as an example, I'd like to see us turn over some more rocks about what money we might use so that we don't lose momentum, but we don't necessarily solely bond a big recreation economic development project.
So the statement that I was going to make is, we have had this conversation for how many years?
One.
Well, and I understand that has been the perspective that maybe you guys that are new on the council have had, but this has been an investment that we have been talking about in our community for years and years and years. And I'm not saying that maybe this is going to be the only answer, but if what we are saying is we're at the point that we need to act and address an infrastructure project that could bring more economic vitality into our community, and that even if we have a placeholder, that we don't have to use it all. And maybe considering the fact that we are applying for other grants for more things to come that constantly need leverage, that we have a set aside amount of funds we could continue operating and maybe starting to be more aggressive about going to our neighbors in the county, talking to the Transient Guest Tax Committee, and even talking to economic development if that's what we want to do. But I think that if we know what the amount is, maybe we just set that money aside so that we could then use it as leverage funds to attract the rest of the funds that we can. Doesn't mean that we have to spend them all. And in the end, it has to come back to us for us to approve it. So I'm just concerned that we're going to be the council that is going to say, I don't feel like we're ready, let's hold on it, and 10 years down the road, we're going to still have the same conversation. And when you're looking at what we're trying to accomplish and bringing people into our community, that is one of the key areas that is ripe for development. There's a lot of development that could happen down there. And this is one of the key areas that people are waiting for to start putting investment into that area.
The other thing that I'll say is with regards to what's being considered with the future for the riverfront. At the last riverfront meeting, one of the individuals that, I can't remember, I think it's Dirty Gals? Dirty Girls, excuse me. Is already buying and renovating a building in Noto where they'll start running their kayak rental business out of. And so they're anticipating, they already have some business that's occurring for recreation on the river, but they are looking at substantial expansion if we can get something like this done. So that's a minor investment, but it is one that is occurring. I just wanted to bring it up.
And Mr. Trout, if I could just to put maybe a bow on this, I'm not against doing the project. I just think at that level, it's not a good value. And I think it could be done within the original budget or maybe just a little more, so.
Okay, well, I can get with staff and do a more depth in discussion and presentation on where we feel why we're at this number, what options we did explore in more detail, either between Deputy Director Braxton and or Engineer Bodner. We can talk about the things that were done in order to try and get a different number and why we ended up selecting this number as our number for the weir renovation.
Thank you.
City Manager, don't let us lose our $500,000. And please, do not just let it go by the wayside. Please bring it to us several months before that happens and remind us. Please do that.
Well, and I think, I appreciate that. For us, we'll be looking at this as an item that will need to go, we go through this budget, we'll have to make a decision, and the decision on the CIP budget will be made in time, I think, for that.
Well, and I can appreciate that, but we're the council. We can do whatever we want to, an aspect of that as well. I have seen this gone from, okay, we're not going to fund it. I've seen it, okay, then, a certain group took it, put it on the shelf and started raising money for it. So I have seen it been adjusted several times, and that's why I say today, don't let us lose our funding without bringing it to us, our attention. Because as a council, I think we need to remember that. That kind of happened with one of our fire stations, and I was not real happy about that.
Yes, ma'am.
And I think as policymakers, as the council, as a governing body, I think that's very important, and I'm asking you to please put that on your radar and please do that.
Right, and this type of guidance and discussion is what's important for me, because now that I've heard some of the comments regarding, pursuit of other locations, I mean, we've thought of those other locations, but initial discussions have not been, have not really gone anywhere. And so we can push a little harder on those areas and see if anything's going to pop up regarding additional funding. So we'll do that.
Mr. City Manager,
Yes.
I'd like to follow up on what Councilman Emerson said. I guess I'm a little fuzzy on if the first bid was it was asked to be redone because of cost and maybe not safety, and so they looked at it a second time and it came back again, and now the redesign costs more than the original. But as Councilman Emerson points out, the original design may have met the specifications or the safety concerns or the recreational concerns, but it was the cost that was the issue. Why couldn't, again, we do the original design at a cheap, not a cheaper, a smaller cost and still get what we wanted. It just,
Well,
I will get turned around on that.
I understand, and I think we need to have the people that worked with the engineers and the others in order to be able to create that, answer that better. But the information that I received was that it wasn't possible to redesign for a lower cost. So I need to get with them to be able to have them in more detail explain to you what the effort that was made in order to look at a redesign and where that result ended up being as it is presented to you. And so that's something that we owe you. And I know this particular item was going to require more discussion and presentation, but and we'll do so in the future in one of the next meetings where we discuss CIP.
Thank you.
Going back to what Councilman Ortiz said, that $500,000 is that a matching fund based on the original project cost of $2.25 million?
It related to a specific feature, which was the fish ladder. And
Okay.
so it's more or less a project component of the redo of the weir. So it was a certain dollar figure that they were willing to contribute to the project.
So could we do that portion of it without the matching funds, without the, I mean, it seems like this $500,000 is contingent on us spending an additional 2.3.
Correct.
Is that, I mean, is it not possible to do the $500,000 project for the fish ladder and not do the additional?
Well, I don't think there's a necessity to do that with the changes that we were looking at, but need to confirm that. But
I just, in my mind, I look at this and I say, well, it's false logic, I think, to spend an additional $2.3 million to get the same $500,000 that you were going to get before.
But without a project, we don't receive that money. I mean, I think that's one of the components that has to be in the project in order to receive that money.
And is there no possibility of reapplying for that money or an additional amount?
Not a guarantee. I mean, I think the program will continue into the future, but there's not a guarantee. We would have to reapply. I believe that. Oh. Yeah, the director of the Parks and Wildlife Authority, we used to be on there, and he's no longer on the authority, so
The
it
new
might
guy is.
project. Yeah. So,
We got two now.
right, but as we look forward, I think the answer that I heard at the last Riverfront Authority was that it would expire, and then we would have to reapply in order to be funded.
Well, I wouldn't be opposed to reapplying for maybe changing the scope of the project and apply for a bigger grant.
I think 500,000 is the limit.
Oh,
If
is
we
it?
were getting it was a fixed
Yes,
grant
it's a fixed
that
amount.
had a maximum amount.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep.
Good questions. Sufficient for whatever. I don't think it was proportional. I think that's what you were kind of looking for at first.
Yeah, I believe it's a fixed amount.
Um,
Any other specific questions? I think the most important thing at this point, in order to wrap up what we're looking at with the GO, is there are projects that are on this list that we didn't talk about. And so what Nick will do is go through the list. Please remember that the capital improvement budget, the first 3 years, is the most important part to look at, but you cannot ignore what we're looking at in the future, because those may be projects as you look at 23 or 24 that you think are in the wrong spot and should be moved up earlier, or they're not going to receive funding at this point. They're simply a plan. They're our next best plan. They're likely projects that you would see next year and move a year closer to being considered. So that's an important way to look at this Excel spreadsheet. So I'll turn it over to Nick, and he'll kind of go category by category and see if you have any questions about projects that we haven't talked about. And then if we need to bring somebody forward to answer a question, we'll do so.
So I'll run through these rather quickly, but again, any questions you have on specific projects, we're happy to answer. On the facilities side, we've talked about the city hall renovations at a couple of council meetings, and so I won't go into much detail on that. Infill sidewalk and pedestrian master plan under neighborhoods, that continues funding that has been approved in previous CIP, so there are no changes. On the public safety side, I'll just point out, and it was brought up at Tuesday's meeting, that there was not any public safety projects in 2020. We try to do 2 engines a year under GO bond fundings. The ones that were initially scheduled for 2020, those are being completed right now with current dollars. And so there's no change to the overall plan of replacing 2 stations in a year. They're just being done currently.
Would, if there isn't any, excuse me, if there is, we end up do move forward with ALS, where would structure funding be put on that for those items?
So there are a couple different ways that can be implemented, and that's one of the discussions right now. But in terms of capital expenditures, I don't think it would be on here. It would be more on the operating budget side, where life safety packs, those types of things, those would be included in the operating budget.
Those aren't in there right now either, right?
We've put in funding for ALS in the operating budget.
Not in the CIP.
Yeah, not to the full scale yet, but without knowing what the final product is going to look like, it's hard to budget for that.
Thank you.
And then on the street projects, I don't have too much to add there. Same thing with traffic signals, which we've talked about. The one thing I will say on general obligation bonds, and so Councilwoman Hiller, you brought up the point about relief for the operating fund. So with the current cap that we have in place, we're looking at 4 or 5 years before we can provide relief to the general fund through potentially moving mills. We'd be looking at about that same timeline with this $33.6 million. Immediate relief, and that's one of the challenges that we get into the operating budget for next year, is that we're looking at 2024, 2025 before we can really shift those funds, and that's because we're paying off debt from 15 years ago. So it's not something that's, escalates quickly or downward quickly. That's kind of the certainty of debt, is that, it's fairly stable. With this and the slide that I showed on Tuesday about how we're still on an overall downward trend on our debt payments, this is actually about a middle ground between the cap and what I showed on Tuesday. So what I showed on Tuesday was about the maximum amount of GO debt, which would be about $13 million a year, or $39 million. So this is about in the middle. I think we'd still see about that same relief in 4 or 5 years. But the challenge on the operating budget this year is that it's not really available because of our existing debt payments.
Understood, but we wanted the whole idea had been for the debt to drop, not to just say, oh, well, let's just stay where we were and backfill it with new debt. I mean, certainly that wasn't the intention of that council in 2008 or whenever it was when they established that policy, and we renewed it only a couple of years ago with the intent of managing that so that the tax dollars that we have go, as much as possible. A question on that would be the way you have structured the last page of this, page 4, I guess, where you've got the out years, the 5 to 10 years out. Those are no longer grouped by the type of funding. So do you have something already or something you can give us that shows what years 6 to 10 look like in terms of what you're proposing for GO? The different financing sources, because they're all put together.
Yeah, it's we can resort that by the funding source. Again, the challenge, even in years 4 and 5 and 6 through 10, are it's a plan. I think when they get into that CIB, we're going to have to still have the discussion of priorities in terms of what's still going to fit within $27 million cap, 30, 33, 39. So this is showing this is overall kind of showing what the needs are. We're still going to have a funding prioritization on it. So
I understand that, but part of how the city got itself in trouble before was kicking that proverbial can down the road and not really looking ahead to what a move for year 1 would look like in year 10. And so I want to make sure we don't do that. We know that we've got operating budget pressure. I know when I talked to the city manager last week or whatever it was, and he'd said, well, it's going to pop for a while, but then it should drop back off. But I can't tell that it's dropping back off with the layout that we have here. And so to me, for us to consider this at all, we need to have an amortization schedule that would show how what you were envisioning would look like over, let's say, 20 years, but also be able to tell, you're asking us to approve this thing, what we'd be, what those categories would look like even.
My response is that staff, we have run that amortization schedule. I wouldn't be proposing this if I didn't think we could continue to decrease the amount of overall debt that we have. With this new number, we're still able to lower our total amount borrowed, or existing, total amount of debt from year to year. The CIP presentation that we showed shows the first 5 years that we're already lowering that, and that it would continue going out. There's a point where it gets better, and it's in the year 2025. We have a couple of things happening in 2025, and that is star bonds ending, some of our specials that we're paying for that we're not getting paid for. Some of those things disappear, and you go into 26. 26 and beyond looks much better with regards to the amount of debt. So what we're looking at is trying to make sure we don't lose sight of the maintenance issues and the deferred maintenance that we have on our facilities, and then looking at the special project relative to the weir. That's what we're looking at, is doing a much more proactive process. That's where the increases come. If you look at the costs, we're about $1 million more in what we're doing for fixing our facilities, and then we have the $2.3 million for the weir. That's what is the biggest chunk of the first year of this budget for the increase in borrowing in the GO bond side, and then a couple of other things going forward, and of course the City Hall project's in there as well. But that's really where the focus is trying to start utilizing the asset that we have, the ability that we have to be able to borrow money and start tackling some of the maintenance issues that we have, realizing that we're not going to affect the overall trend that we want to create for reducing overall debt.
Well, I can't speak for everyone, but I'd like to see the amortization schedule.
We'll get that. It's been created by our staff. So.
Thank you.
Mr. City Manager, of the things that we've requested, each of us, could you just supply that to everybody?
You bet, we will.
Yeah.
Most definitely. Everyone will receive it.
we'll jump back into the presentation and talk about cash projects, and then
All right, and so we're going to hit some of the highlights of cash projects, and this first one is a continuation from last year. And as I talked about earlier in the presentation, this is the first and probably the most critical step in developing an asset management program. So what this project is it's an inventory project. It's where we hire a contractor to collect data on our assets within public rights of way. So there's about 15 different categories of assets, trees, traffic signs, our signal inventory, curb and gutter. Believe it or not, we don't have a physical curb and gutter data. We know typically where it is, but we don't have any condition information on the whole system of curb and gutter. We have a variety of data sets about different utility assets, hydrants, valves, inlets, those types of things. This would also augment that with condition inventory on that. And so why are we doing this? As I said, it's critical to know what we have, where it is, what the condition is, and then as we start engaging with the body, what is that level of service that's needed to maintain that asset? A lot of the struggle when I got here and looking at the CIP, we have all these projects, but having that from an asset management perspective, what's the best return on investment on the infrastructure from the technical life cycle side? We've not been able to articulate that very well to you. And so this is helping us do that. It meets the council goal of investing in infrastructure, and then I would also argue it meets the council goal of fiscal sustainability, because then we're able, as you just had this conversation, to talk about those trade-offs, because there's a life cycle, but then there's a risk. We know things can last beyond their life cycle, so what's the risk of going beyond that? And we can put that kind of in monetary terms. So if Dan will go to the next one. So as we start to build this inventory, our TSG staff, working with IT and other partners, has been working behind the scenes to build what we call these asset inventory dashboards. And this is what staff uses to help kind of develop the CIP project. So once we know where it is, what the condition is, and start to put some things like risk, we can make better decisions as an organization. You're looking at a screenshot here of water main breaks throughout the city. Kind of on the left and right-hand side, we can collect different data, looking at trends over time, individual locations, cost of repair associated with that. And what's critical to drive that is an accurate inventory. So just like anyone that owns a shop with materials, you may have an auditor come in and say you have to do an inventory from time to time. We have an inventory, but this is a snapshot in time that verifies what we have, as well as getting us what we don't have is some condition information on a lot of that inventory. We're able to leverage technology to help us do this, similar to the way that we did the pavement management and had a van drive through and give us that condition score. The way technology is going, we can hire a similar contractor to do that basically, like if you've ever used Google Street View, they drive through a corridor with cameras. They can bring that camera video information back in, and using machine learning actually extract the images of what that is, give us the detail. Is that an aluminum pole? Is it a metal pole? What type of traffic sign it is? All those types of things that we need to do that. And then, so it helps with internal staff information for our long-term plan. Dan, if you go to the next slide. And then the other piece that we kind of push out to the public, this is just some of what we call our GIS mapping information, but putting this out across the Department for Communication about projects, but as well as economic development activities. As you know, like when we did the partnering with the Downtown Plaza on replacing, upgrading the infrastructure in the alley and 7th Street with that, this information is used by those private designers as we develop, as well as economic development activities are looking at our community. They ask for this information so they can do their pro forma needs. So we're currently, like I said, this project started last year. We have received proposals and currently reviewing those and expect to award a contract to get this work going this year. The next one, this is a new project. It's a cash project, and it's what I would call a best practice in fleet replacement programs. This is in the 5th year of the CIP, so it's not in the CIB. But once again, this project reflects our continued approach to implementing good asset management practices by systematically planning for our fleet replacement. As many of you know, fire, we kind of have the apparatus and engine schedule. That's a systematic plan. Police has their annual allotment for replacing vehicles. We don't have a similar program for that for the rest of our vehicles and equipment across the city. Our fleet and equipment basically reflects about $46 million in asset value. And so this meets the council goal of investing in our infrastructure, our public safety, and fiscal sustainability. Prior to me coming on board in 2016, there was a report from Faster saying that we need to be budgeting about $4.5 million annually for our fleet replacement, and that's what we're reflecting in here. And that would move the average age of our vehicle life from about 11 years total. Some have less life cycle, others have longer, to about 7 years. And ideally, we'd like to be a little less than that. So we go to the next slide. Just want to highlight some of the vehicles and equipment that are out there. You've seen our snow plows and spreaders in operation, and see the condition of those vehicles. Everything from pickup trucks to other pieces of equipment. And what I wanted to highlight is you actually authorized funding in 2018 for the start of what we called a pilot fleet replacement program. And the beauty of the way this program works is this creates a fund for replacing fleet assets. So it's a specific fund for that. And then the money is put into department budgets basically to pay in annually the replacement value of that vehicle. So in 2018, we started this with about 74 vehicles. We had voluntary participation, so currently we have fire, city manager's office, planning and development services, communication and public works participating in this program. And so we basically identified vehicles and will continue to pay out of our operating fund the replacement on that. So what does that do? That basically creates a pool fund that helps spread out the level load over financing, or not financing, but over years for different vehicle replacement, as well as provide some cushion if we have a vehicle that gets totaled due to an accident or some other failure, that you have a fund to draw on for those emergency replacements. And then over time, you're able to basically make up that draw of the funds by contributing that replacement value. Coming back to the whole discussion on general obligation funding, this becomes kind of a cash funding project, so we're basically not paying interest to finance these vehicles and planning for that long-term systematic replacement. Last piece, before you leave that, why is it important? Because that aging fleet affects our ability to provide services. With the recent winter weather events, our fleet folks have been working really hard to keep our plows and spreaders in operation, but the reality is, the average age of our dump trucks is over 10 years, and so they need a lot of maintenance to keep them going. So really helps us keep a good level of service to the community. All right.
Any questions in this particular area?
Is it cheaper to contract out, like our?
So we are talking with Enterprise and some of those others to see. They still will require a financing model. Basically, they have programs. I know the state uses them on a certain class of vehicle for it. And so I don't have the short answer is yes or no on contracting out. I do know some people go with those contract models as opposed to self-funding.
Mm-hmm. And the reason I ask is because it keeps getting brought up year after year after year. And then that takes the wear and tear off, puts it on their vehicle as opposed to ours. And
right. The issue is they still charge an administrative overhead fee and a service fee associated with the vehicles. They don't call it financing, but there is kind of an overhead cost for administration of the contracting out program. Things that they tout is, that we've got to look at the math is, do they have better buying power because they're coming from a national company and they're purchasing agreements, so maybe we get vehicles at a lower rate cost.
No, I'm talking about contractors, like a snow removal. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Councilman, I misunderstood
like,
your
what?
question. I thought you were talking about.
I was like,
I thought you were talking about fleet replacement. So we already have contracts for snow removal for hauling and plowing. In the past 2 events, we have used those contracts. Talked with the city manager. We're going to come back to you in March and April with a summary of what our expenses have been to date, and continue that conversation about level of service and what's the best way to do it, if it's for us to own the equipment and do it,
right,
or continue that
and
contract.
I'm sure we'd have to have some equipment, but maybe not as much as, so that was my question. And I'm going to go back a little bit. Replacement of mediums, I thought we weren't doing that anymore. I thought once we took them out, we were just leaving them out. couple of years we talked about that.
So we take out medians in certain locations, but we will still have the need for medians from a traffic safety standpoint. And so we need to, like all our infrastructure pieces, plan for replacement of those. And so that's why we're still showing a project for replacements of medians. We get a number of comments about the condition and appearance of them, which, doesn't look great in our community. And so, we want to make sure that we're systematically replacing them. That's why we.
Well, Jason, I was told the opposite, that they're more safer. Let's go to 25th in California. And
I'm sorry, I just want the more safe.
With them out, with them not being there. Let's go to 25th in California. And when that stretch of California got done, we had a medium there that was on California that they took out because they said it was safer, and there wasn't one ever put back in there.
So, yes, ma'am, there are places where maybe a median's not warranted. The intersection of 29th and Burlingame, we took out one of the medians over there. What I would say to you is what medians help do is they help with the capacity, keeping our throughput, and they also help drivers make good decisions. Some people will want to make a turn wherever they want, and if it's in a congested area, those medians can kind of put those turns where drivers can do that safely.
So we put them where we think that they're
So we
valuable.
have, we've talked about this. There are medians that are legacies from old state highway systems that may have reflected different traffic volumes at different times. So all those things would be looked at as we get into some of the pavement management project. But if we're not doing a street project and we have medians that look in poor shape, we want to look at, does it make sense to replace them and have a fund source to do that?
Okay. And then wayfinding signs, I know when Mayor Button was in, we took out a whole lot, so I think there was funding for more. So are they in, are they out? What are we doing there?
So they are in, and that is a continuation from the previous 2 years. We actually have that project under contract. We're going through, this was in partnership with Go Topeka on replacing those old black and yellow with the capital wayfinding signs. There was a large planning effort, I believe back in 2015, 2016, to select a new type and style of signs. And so this is the last year of funding basically to complete that project, but that will be under construction this year, the replacement of that. What's not funded with that is the gateway signs, which are on the interstate systems around Topeka. We are waiting on feedback from KDOT. They were not allowing any replacement of those signs until they got a policy in place. They're supposed to have that coming to us pretty soon, and then we can make assessment of what needs to be done on that.
Okay, thank you. And City Manager, it looks like maybe you might want to take a break. We're losing some people.
Well, I know, and that was the thing. We wanted to get through at least the cash projects, and then from there, next, we're going into the countywide and citywide half-cent sales tax. And so, yes, I think we could take a 10-minute break.
Could I ask one question while we're still on
Sure,
this
yeah,
exact
we're on the
same
subject. We want to finish.
Yeah.
Any questions?
On the fleet replacement, do we have right now, do we have a policy, is it at 100,000 miles, is it at, what's that?
It varies by different vehicle, and we can get you a copy of that because, we might have some equipment that has a different hours criteria as opposed to a mileage. And of course, with police cruisers, they might have a lower threshold than others. We have in place internally with this pilot program, we put together the Fleet Management Committee that makes sure that as vehicles are being replaced or added through, they're going through an internal review process to make sure that we're not oversizing or undersizing vehicles, that they are warranted in replacement. The other piece is we maintain a low mileage, low use vehicle inventory, and we circulate that annually because the cost of maintaining the vehicles, we still have to do PMs, servicing, checking those out through fleet maintenance, even if they are low use. So we want to make sure departments are keeping low use vehicles for a specific purpose as opposed to just hanging on to them.
That would be, I think it's a little more complex. Obviously, it's a little bit more complex than saying, okay, we're going to buy all new buy vehicles, we're going to lease vehicles, whatever. I think there could be some benefit into looking into there's certain vehicles that obviously we need to purchase just because of whether it's retrofitting, whatever it is. But I think there could definitely be, it would be worth looking into some savings for, certain vehicles. I'm not to pick on Brent, but Brent's type car or certain, just normal pickup vehicles. The advantage of leasing, obviously, we don't get depreciation and all those type of things for us, but we don't have any maintenance costs. Something breaks, take it in, they fix it, and kind of doing an analysis of what that would look like if we had X amount of that we didn't have to have either our own people or the cost of parts, cost of repairs, all those type of things, as well as, we'll continuously have operating vehicles with the latest safety features, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it might at least looking and taking it one step further to look at that. I don't know if police cars are because of what we have to do to those, if that makes sense, but certainly some of those other vehicles, not having that capital expenditure could help as well.
Right, and so, that's one of the things why this is out in year 5. It's in the planning horizon so that we can continue to have that dialogue and come back with a well-formulated plan as it moves into the CIB.
Thank you.
Yes.
That's one nice.
Kind of on the same note with the fleet replacement, are we still negotiating our own purchases, or do we participate now in one of the national procurement cooperatives?
My understanding, we use the state contract, but I'm not aware of any national joint purchasing agreement contracts that we use.
We do use a state of Kansas contract on 3/4 ton and under vehicles and some of law enforcement vehicles. However, the joint committees or contracts that are out there, we have not been allowed to use as current. We are in the process of working with CNP to try to get that rectified.
Okay. So that's something we're working on, though?
Yeah, Councilman Mays, this is Brian Biggewalt. He's our Fleet Services Division Manager. And it's the national kind of joint purchasing contracts. What we're doing is working with, we're not currently using them, but working with contracts and procurements to see what would be needed to do to get to that, whether it's ordinance changes or compliance with our state statutes. So,
Okay. I think it'd be good to look into, because I know that from what I understand, there's some significant savings there.
Yeah, it's a balancing act. We get savings, but it may not be local purchases. So, that's something that just need to have everybody be aware of.
True.
Has there been discussion or consideration of including fire trucks in the fleet fund?
We talked about that and just the large capital expense associated with that. Decided to leave the engine and apparatus within the GO portion of it. And that was our strategy. Definitely, if you want us to, take a look at that, we can.
Well, I think given the fact that I don't know exactly how we finance those orders or whether we just wait till they come in terms of paying for them, but in terms of reducing our costs and stabilizing budgets, if there were an assessment of how much average per year was needed to pay for the trucks, and it was deposited annually into that fleet fund. And then because it takes 12 to 18 months to get a fire truck, as I understand it, it could allow those orders to go whenever they were needed, a stabilization on the operating budget. And as we know, the fire trucks are 10-year financing is a little less than 30-year financing, but still we're paying an extra 25% for the financing. And so for me, if there's some way we could make it stable to be able to purchase them through that, I just was asking whether you considered it for the fund.
We have looked at that. The biggest thing is that the cost, what we would have to put aside annually in our operating budget in order to be able to fund those is pretty substantial. And that would be a hit to the operating budget that I'm not sure at this point we would be able to manage. I have a lot of concerns about being able to manage $1.6 million annually out of that.
Well, the issue is that for debt service, we're paying that much plus, because we're doing it every year, then we're buying whatever it is, an average of $1.6 million of engines a year, and we're paying, and on them, each one is going to cost us around $400,000 to $500,000 in interest. So that's a net of $2.1 million a year, whatever it would be, that it adds up. I mean, each purchase,
We
when
can
you add
get
them up.
I think we need to look at what the actual interest cost is. I don't believe it's quite that high.
Well,
on
I
a-
went, just to go back and forth with Doug on this,
Yeah.
and at the 25% net additional cost is the least that we've had, even at the low interest rates that we've had. So if you can show me it's less than that, but depending on what kind of bonds it was, it's anywhere from 25 to 60%. That's a lot of money.
Well, but you also need to take into consideration that we invest those bond proceeds and we get them and we earn interest back on it. And right now, essentially that cost is very minimal when you take into account the revenue that we receive from the interest on that. And, we'll provide the amortization schedule that was requested earlier. And I think there was a question last year if we move some funding to cash and lowered our bond cap, that savings over 20 years was maybe $200,000, and that was with pretty conservative interest rates and revenue rates being considered there. And as the city manager said, shifting that right now would be a big hit to our operating budget. So there are a lot of challenges in that, not saying that it may not be the overall best advantage, but that's something that I think we will continue to expand on that and provide additional information. So,
For my part, I'm pretty concerned when we're tossing around numbers like 25%, especially knowing that money right now borrowed is pretty much free. And I'm saying it not in the sense of that there is no interest to it, but I know that we have the fees that we have to pay that, we have to take into account, but the interest rates are pretty low. So if there is an understanding somewhere that we are expending 25% in bonding, then we must be doing something wrong, especially with our awesome bond score, because we have a great score, which means that we have better financing. So I understand that we want to make sure that we are not overextending ourselves in bonding, but the other thing that I want us to remember as we're considering all the projects that we have right here is the fact that there is talks about this year, the rates for the interest rates are thinking of going up twice. So at this point in time, when we're looking at everything that we're looking at, anything that we'll do later on will cost us more. But right now, we're not at a 25%.
We'll check.
Just to kind of close out the cash funding piece, this is our most, I'll say, ambiguous funding source, because as we've done in the past couple years' budgets, especially on the general fund and debt service side, we haven't put those in the budget, what's been approved in the CIP, because we've waited until the end of the year to see what funding we have available. I would anticipate that we would continue that, but if you remember from 2018, we did not do a reserve fund, so that'll be a continued challenge that we have in this particular funding source. That being said, there are a lot of these that are built into the operating budgets of departments right now. So police department fleet replacement, the body-worn cameras, and some of these other projects are ones that are already built into our operating budget. There are some things in addition to that we look at on an annual basis, and that's kind of the trouble with cash is it's done annually, and you have to see what's available based on our revenue estimates. One project that I'll just highlight really quick that was discussed last year was the Southeast 29th Kansas Turnpike Authority interchange. We have that in 2020 right now. We are looking at potential funding sources for that, but based on the conversation last year and the need to prioritize that, we have moved that up, and that would be the design design phase of that potential project.
Please, no.
The last item that I want to look is we look at the cash sources in the whole spreadsheet. You need to look at a couple of different things. The one that I want to call out is the automobile vehicle location and preemption. And have Jason mention which departments we're looking at that and what that project is about. It is definitely part of the type of cutting edge things we're looking at doing that will help a number of departments. Jason?
Sure. So this is a continuation project as well, and we've got a vendor we're negotiating a contract with, but we have GPS location services in some vehicles currently within the Department of Public Works and Utilities. What this project does is gets us all on one system, and then also gets us a GPS real-time location system that ties in with all the asset inventory and other data information. As Councilman Mays learned coming down to our snow operations, we have vehicles that are out there plowing the routes, and they are radioing back in to the shop, and then we update the routes to show it. Part of that's the system that we have, so this is a new system that allows that. As they complete a route, it updates the information readily, so that's a piece of it. The other piece is the preemption. And what is preemption? So this is basically allowing those vehicles to communicate to traffic signals. Everybody wishes they could have one of these in their car, because if you did, it would, and you turn it on, it makes the light turn green for you as you move through. So very important, as we work with our fire and emergency services to have that so they can be more efficient in getting to calls. But then the other piece is on the snow routes. So, think about preemption for our plows as they're moving through a route, being able to get that signal to change so they're not having to slow down through that. So real exciting project. Currently it's Public Works, Utilities, and Fire. Who else am I missing? Yeah, Department of Neighborhood Relations and Planning and Development Services will be the participating vehicles in that. Also allows us to use our information to do better route planning for street sweeping and other things like that. So really, you get a lot of efficiency gains out of this project.
So any other questions on the cash before we take a break? So when we come back, we'll talk countywide half cent and citywide half cent next. So we'll break until, let's go, what?
I will make a quick announcement.
Okay.
Yeah, commercial break.
So, commercial break?
Commercial break.
What's your announcement?
I need to get it.
We're in process. So please pray.
Active labor.
Okay. So we'll be back at 20 till, so 10:40.
Where?
Code is back
I
under
thought you gave them to me.
Neighborhood Relations.
Yes, okay.